Morning show. I am bringing in U.S. Congressman Thad McCotter of Michigan, Republican. Congressman, how are you this morning?
How are you?
Doing well. We appreciate the time. Hey, I wanted to jump in with, before I get into finances with you, because I know you're big on that, I wanted to throw this one at you. You got Rand Paul over in the Senate getting together with 5 other senators, sending a letter to President Obama on the War Powers Act in Libya. They're saying tomorrow marks 60 days from when he got us involved with what's going on in Libya. He went to the UN for permission, but never went to you guys for permission. So the Senate is pushing this letter. Over on your side in the House, what are you guys doing anything about the War Powers Act and Obama in Libya?
Well, I believe it's going through the Defense Committee, the Intel Committee. They're all looking at it. Everyone's looking at it because, as you know, and as the senators know, the president has never laid out a clearly defined policy here. We've already seen mission creep, where the initial talk about a no-fly zone is now creeping into support for individual movements on the ground, acts on military targets. And clearly the War Powers Act has to be followed. In terms of the senator's letter, I think it's very helpful, and I think it's something that the House is looking at. But as you know, and what we're going to talk about, the big issue right now is what's going to happen with the debt ceiling in the House, where all spending bills originate. Yeah,
we're definitely going to get to that. It bothers me that President Obama's been able to do this and to try to say, well, we just didn't have time to go to Congress, and it's been almost 60 days, and how do you have time to go to the UN, but you don't have time to go to your own Congress? That bothers me.
Well, it's also bothersome that he also mentioned that the CIA and others were on the ground trying to determine who the factions were after the hostilities have been engaged in. That's completely irresponsible.
Absolutely. And unless Congress acts, he's just going to keep doing it. So I'm glad that you guys are at least starting to move on that. I think you have to, or you're not holding him accountable. And that's why we have a balance of powers. Let's get into the debt ceiling. All right. So, like, as you mentioned, we just hit up against it supposedly, but it's kind of a soft ceiling. And it won't really probably be a big deal until August. And, you know, one of the things that doesn't get talked about, Congressman McCotter, is that this isn't the first time we've waited to raise the debt ceiling. I mean, I had it in front of me the other day, but it was like there's been 4 times over the last 20 years where we've waited 3 months here and 4 months here, and the world didn't end, and there's plenty of ways you can prioritize paying off and servicing the debt before you do anything else, and we're not going to default on it. So it seems like the White House is trying to set up this false narrative that if we don't instantly raise the debt ceiling, then you guys are trying to destroy our country.
Well, it was very much the same scenario underneath the Wall Street bailout, where the world was going to end. And then when the House voted it down, majority of Republicans both times voting against it, the world did not end. And they managed to find more time, unfortunately, to pass it. And what you see them doing now is the same type of crisis management that they're putting in place. Look, the reality is that they should have shown this type of concern prior to reaching the debt ceiling, and perhaps they wouldn't have done it in the first place. So what the House Republicans are trying to do, the Republican Study Committee, has just issued a letter, which I agreed to sign on, talking about how we need to have a balanced budget amendment, how we need to have budget reforms and spending caps so that we don't get into this place again. Simply to rely on reducing government expenditures, as we know from the history of the welfare state and big government, when you reduce the budget, it just winds up bouncing back up again, and you find yourself in the same place or worse, as we do today.
Yes, and I like all those things. Then you look at the reality. The balanced budget amendment would take years because you got to get all the states, 2/3 of the states, to approve it as well, and you got to get supermajority in the House and the Senate, which you don't have right now and probably aren't going to get. But that doesn't mean don't try for it. But let's be realistic; that's not going to happen tomorrow. The caps you would think you could get before you say yes to the debt ceiling increase. Are there certain things, Congressman McCotter, that you are saying, if I don't get this, I am not voting for the increase in the debt ceiling?
Well, I think the answer to the constituents want is, are you going to be able to say it's the last time and why? Or when there'll be a last time. And if you can't do that, that's why the support for the balanced budget amendment being passed on to the states for their approval. Congress, as you rightly know, cannot do that. But I think it would happen, and at least you would have it in the hands of the states to do it, to prevent this in the future. The spending caps would have to be concomitant with it so that you have immediate relief in terms of starting to reduce the federal deficit. If you simply go again for the budget cuts, which I'm afraid may be the scenario, that's not going to work, and you're not going to be able to say it's the last time, and that's what the constituents are going to measure you by. Because as you know, the American people, as they always are ahead of the politicians on this, they do not want to see that debt ceiling raised.
Yeah, I'm with you. It has to be caps, because the other stuff just, it ends up being a lot less than we're told it is every time that it happens, and then we're nickel and diming over cuts that don't seem to really matter.
when you wind up, the spending winds up going back up over time anyway.
Yeah. So are you telling me that you have enough people in the House who are saying we're not going to vote for this unless caps are in place?
Well, I think you already have on the RSC letter, I think you're close to 70 members now. And I think that's, it's a collection where we don't work for the leadership, we work for our constituents, and we'll see how many people's constituents sees are going to be happy with their position. But as far as myself, that's my position. I'd share that with the RSC members, and we're going to continue to keep pushing.
Yeah, that's what it takes, because like you said, unfortunately, there are some people in leadership that I think will cave, and it's going to be up to the rest of you guys to hold strong and see what happens. Let's move on to the Obamacare thing, because that has a lot to do with this spending problem too. It's going to increase spending, and of course that ties into Paul Ryan's plan. A lot of people ran on the platform that they were going to work to repeal Obamacare, and if they couldn't repeal it, they were going to defund it. Well, now I'm hearing rumors from people in the House, well, we can't really defund it right now, so we're not going to worry about that until the next election. What are you hearing, and where do you stand on that?
Well, I continue to support the immediate defunding of Obamacare. What we're looking at here is the failure to understand the law of supply and demand, the subjugation of sovereign citizens beneath their servant government in Obamacare. When you think about it, the whole rationale of Obamacare has been the government will control the supply of health care in a time of rising demand to reduce costs. We know that is absolutely wrong. When you make something less available in a time of rising demand, costs go up. This inevitably leads to the rationing you'll see through the Independent Payment Advisory Board and its concomitant think tank that's just going to feed it information. Those are two places right away that have to be defunded. I think that one of the things that Republicans have to remember is that even though the odds are against it, you have to continue to wage some effort to repeal it in accordance with the wishes of the American people. And you can't just simply say, oh, well, we'll leave it till tomorrow, because it will continue to grow, continue to take root, and continue to use taxpayers' dollars to foist upon them something they didn't want in the first place.
And it's hard to stop it once it gets started. Congressman Thad McCotter with me here. He's a Republican from Michigan on the KCMO Morning Show. But are you hearing other members in the House tell you, well, listen, Thad, we're just not going to be able to get that done this time, so let's just wait till the next election? Are you hearing that?
No, I tend to hear the opposite. I think the members are very much in touch with their constituents, and the constituents' wishes to get rid of it. And so I would think that one of the things we have to guard against is, again, the House Republicans, despite the wave election, were only entrusted to a majority within the House, not in the Senate. Really not, obviously, in the presidency. So frustration will set in. But it's going to be a battle that has to be continuously fought. And one cannot give in to that type of frustration, because ultimately then it leads to failure. Yeah,
and the power that you do have is the spending has to originate in the House, so you guys do have some power there that the Senate doesn't. I also want to get into, along with Obamacare, you're seeing this power grab, aren't you, Congressman McCotter, from the Obama administration? A law was passed, and now they're deciding on their own who really has to abide by it and who doesn't with these waivers, over 1,300 waivers. And it looks like a majority of them are going to friends of the Obama administration, unions, companies that supported Obamacare. The most recent waivers, 20% of the most recent ones went into Nancy Pelosi's district. It sure seems like some favoritism and Obama picking winners and losers here. That's not the way our country's supposed to work.
Well, I think that it's fortunate that we have Representative Darrell Issa at the Government Oversight Committee, who's going to have hearings on this, the transparency, and to see if there was any tit for tat or quid pro quo in terms of the waivers. But it is one of the continuing sources of frustration of the American people, is to see that the very groups that most strenuously and vehemently advocated for Obamacare now want no part of it, while the rest of us wind up covered under it. Mm-hmm. It shows that the policy is fundamentally flawed. I mean, I cannot think of a situation where someone has run around saying that this is good for everybody and then immediately wanted to get out from under it.
Yeah, last thing I wanted to get to with you, Congressman Thad McCotter here, Republican, Michigan, on the KCMO Morning Show. Newt Gingrich, of course, coming out over the weekend and saying some pretty negative things about Paul Ryan's plan, calling it radical, social engineering from the right, about the Medicare and the budget plan that he has out there. He's now tried to apologize for that. Where do you stand on what Newt said, and do you think that he can come back from that gaffe?
Well, it's going to be up to the electorate in the presidential primaries to determine that. I supported the Ryan plan. I support augmenting it by increasing the supply of health care through free market reforms as well. Paul's budget was constrained by the fact that it was a budget document. It wasn't an overall approach to health care. We all understood that. Right. And more reforms are going to be necessary. But in terms of that, I think that the left enjoys it when Republicans fight. And as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Gingrich has apologized. Paul's accepted it, and now we're going to move forward.
All right. Listen, we appreciate the time. We wish you all the best. Keep fighting the good fight. Thanks for being with us.